All right, hello and welcome to the Art Museum of West Virginia University and our first in our Lunchtime Looks lecture series, that's a lot of L's, our Lunchtime Looks lecture series for the 2025-2026 academic year. So for those of you who don't know, who is your first time here, throughout the semester we invite members of the Morgantown community, the university community to come and speak about our exhibitions and the works of art within them from their unique perspectives. So sometimes we have people from fields as diverse as biology and political science who come and tell us a little bit about what they see and think and feel about our exhibitions through the lens of their own expertise. So today our speaker actually has an art history background, so that's an extra special bonus. She is an alum of our art history program with an MA and is also the curator for the Arts in the Libraries program. So if you've ever seen the amazing exhibitions that are installed in our libraries all across campus, our speaker today, Sally Brown, is responsible for that. So we're very lucky to have her here today. She is also a practicing artist whose artwork explores themes of motherhood, womanhood, and the body. And I think you'll quickly come to see and realize how those connections in that area of artistic practice is inflected through the exhibition here, Evolving Visions, a century of women artists working in abstraction. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sally.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm Sally Brown, like she said, and I just kind of want to get started with first impressions of this work. Does anyone want to volunteer and say even a few words about maybe what you thought the first time you saw this work?
And I'm going to ask, I'll come around with the microphone because we record for our YouTube archive. So even if you think you have a loud voice, we'll ask you to speak into the microphone both now and in our Q&A session. So, any first impressions of this piece that we're looking at? Anyone brave enough to grab the microphone and tell us what you're thinking? Okay.
Thank you.
My first impression is, especially on the right-hand side, it seems to give my eye the freedom to sort of fill in and continue lines and sort of draw that geometry on my own.
Thank you. Yeah. Geometric cubism. Anyone else? Okay, well, the reason I asked is because when I first, a couple weeks ago, came through this exhibition, like Heather said, my specialty and my passion is feminist art, figurative art, so I actually walked right past it. It was kind of pretty to me, which I think it is, but it didn't really strike me. I was really into a few over there, Leslie Dill and Mae Stevens, which have feminist backgrounds, so it didn't strike me at first, but once I met with Bob, the curator, and he actually told me about the label. I don't know if anyone's been able to read her statement over here. It's about her being a mother artist and having the constraints of her space and making work in spare bedrooms, making work being a mom, and so I really connected to that as a mother artist and also as a feminist artist. Immediately I thought of Judy Chicago because in her first autobiography she talked about how women were distinguished against because they actually worked in the home in domestic spaces. And so a lot of critics and others kind of put them down for working in the kitchen or in spare bedrooms or in other bedrooms. So with that, I kind of got really excited and dove into this mother artist. And as you can see, this is kind of quintessential. She was 46 when this is painted. Like you said, there is cubism aspects to it. There's shapes. There's also some gradation in these shapes. And there's also a big constraint with space. That's immediately what I thought when I read her statement about her kind of tension with her space, and it kind of reads that way to me with the kind of interior with the beginning and then the expanse. So it's a big tension for her space, both interior and the exterior. And to kind of back up, I am like I said, I lean towards feminist work, and so part of that is looking at the environment of the artist and their background and their life. And she was born in California. She's a Japanese, both of her parents were Japanese, and she actually moved back to Japan with her mom at age 5, so she was born in 1918, so 1920s, and spent the first 5 or 10 years there studying art and writing, but she actually had a breakdown at such a young age, and she was constrained to her bed for a long time. So again, at a very young age, she was already dealing with the tension of space. She also dealt with an earthquake while she was in Japan. Then they moved back to California. She spent the rest of her early school in California and then went to UC Berkeley, where she studied watercolor. You can see one of her early works on the page 2, I think it is. So that's one of the works of her watercolor. And you can see it's pretty expressive, dark line quality, more representational in her early work. That was a lot of the work that she studied while she was at UC Berkeley. And then in her last year of UC Berkeley, she was actually in an internment camp for Japanese. She also met her husband that last year of college. They both went to the internment camp. And she actually taught art while she was there with another UC Berkeley professor. So she was amongst other Japanese Americans at this young stage in her life. And then she got into Smith University or Smith College in Massachusetts. And on her way there, she actually stopped in Chicago and visited the Art Institute. She fell in love with it. She kept going and studied at Smith for a while, the only graduate student in art. There, she struggled with oil painting, and she eventually came back to Chicago, where she continued her study and started studying oil painting. And she kind of struggled with that medium throughout her studies at the Art Institute of Chicago. And you can see some of her inspirations, like I said before, on that 3rd page of Cubism. So we already spoke about the Cubism and the shapes and the hues. What artists do I have there? Braque, Picasso. And in the spirit, you can see on my notes, she mentioned Braque and Picasso. Well, I also mentioned Sonia Delany, an artist who was a woman who is also a Cubist influenced. Yeah, the vivid colors, the hues that formed the shapes really inspired her. And she changed from non-representational and expressive more to the non-representational. So representational to non-representational. And so you can really see the Cubist inspiration there. And her earlier work was more kind of, this one's earlier, this one's 1964. This one's a little earlier. She had more kind of brackish, mid-century, darker colors. And you can see these shapes are more, it's less, even representational than this one. But before that, I should say, she did explore with printmaking, as you can see in the top right. So her first baby was born in 1949. And she was experimenting with interiors, more representational. On the 2nd page, you can see her print objects in the nursery, and then the easel and table. And she did start with these darker colors, these brackish colors. And then she started exploring with more abstract earlier on, as you can see there, in the 1950s. In Chicago. She remained the rest of her life making work in Chicago. And she started experimenting with these layers of paint. It's really interesting. She has an underpainting, whether it's blue or green or a different color, and then she would kind of draw with charcoal, kind of more inspired by her Japanese culture or the writing, where she would just kind of automatically draw. And sometimes she would spend weeks on this drawing to get it right. And then she would paint very precise paintings horizontally. And actually, if you look, like on the side of one, sorry, Jason, if you look on the side, this one's more prominent, but you can see you can almost see like the lines where she drew, so she doesn't explicitly paint on those lines. So that's kind of where the modernist inspiration with these colors, the surface colors is more, on the second page I have Pierre Bonnard, and he actually painted from memory, which she also painted from memory, as well as another modernist, Suzanne Valadin. So more so kind of thinking about the interior spaces with those two modernists. And the surrealism was also a big inspiration for her, and that's kind of more the precision in her process and illogical painting. It can be representational. In her later work, you can see it kind of looks more like interior as she goes on the next slide. With her 1969 work, it kind of looks more like furniture, interior furniture, but it's not quite interior furniture. Maybe it's a mirror, but yeah, so they remain kind of non-objective, objective with her attention of space. So I'll go back to the 1950s. She was kind of part of the Monster Roster, which was a group in the 1950s, 60s in Chicago that painted more like World War II traumatic figurative work, and she was less figurative, although she was kind of grouped within that group, and she kept friends with those artists. Although I don't see, that's why I put the figurative work on there, because there was some figurative work that she did that was explicit figurative, that was kind of more abstract than the other folks in the Monster Roster. And she also sometimes, in the 60s and 70s, got grouped with the Imagists, and they were kind of more playful and more figurative, but she still had that kind of quirkiness to her work. And there was another spatial tension to her work. So throughout the 1950s is when she kind of raised her children, and she was a very slow painter. She, like I said, she was meticulous, and each painting as she had kids took a while, at least a month, even less so when she had kids. And then after they were a little bit older, all of her works kind of got warmer in color. If you look at her works from the beginning, they're kind of brackish and dark and mid-century. And then as you get older, or as she develops, they kind of get lighter and more warmer as she goes on. Some people have said it's kind of like in the morning is when she started with the dawn, and then as her work goes along, it's kind of like the sunset. So again, my passion is feminist art, and I really connect to her work in her tension of space and her tension of domestic and subjective interior. So her she emerged not despite being a mother, but she emerged through being a mother. And although she never talked about feminist work or being a feminist artist, I do believe that her strength and autonomy and continuing to make work even in mid-century America as a mom was very feminist. And one of my favorite artists is Judy Chicago. She's a feminist artist. She's still working and living, and she actually is from Chicago. And like I said, one of her autobiographies, she wrote about how women were kind of put down and ignored and not really paid attention to because they made work in their domestic spaces. So that was my first connection. My second connection was that Judy Chicago is from Chicago, and she actually, when she was a kid, took art classes at the Art Institute where Miyoko Odo spent time. So did they cross paths? I don't think so. And then Judy Chicago actually went to school in California, so they kind of switched. Judy Chicago is younger. But so at the beginning of Chicago's career, she was more minimalist because that's what her education at UCLA, that was kind of the trend and what all of her professors were telling her to do. You can see this Mother Superette there on that slide. This is one of her works from school, from UCLA. And it's a feminine figure, but it's definitely symbolizes women's agency. So you can tell that it's made from the female figure, but it's definitely similar to Miyoko Ito in that it's more cubist. Yes, so she's transforming the literal body experience into these subjective paintings and shapes. And then the rainbow picket is one of hers that was definitely during her minimalistic period, but she still uses the rainbow colors, which is reminiscent of Miyoko Ito's Kachina there, present there, and they're both more about color and form and space, as well as Judy Chicago's from her Great Ladies series. So all of these paintings from Judy Chicago each are in honor of a woman in history, but they're not representational, they're abstract. So again, both artists worked in abstract to transform literal narratives into abstract and not representational works. And the last one is kind of a stretch, but being that Miyoko Ito worked as a woman during this time period, she didn't necessarily discuss it, but she obviously was a woman during this time period and had some sexist, notably, I mean, she must have had some experiences with sexism, and this is one of the more obvious works of Judy Chicago's where it's called The Crippled by the Need to Control, about men's control over women. And so, but she also has sort of the colors, these kind of California colors that Judy Chicago uses that I think in Miyoko Ito's work, you can see another critic also said that she started with dark Chicago colors and she ended with warm California colors. So I do think that her use of space, tension in space, throughout her career definitely qualifies as feminist to me. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. We
Yeah.
really appreciate that. So now we have some time for question and answer. So does anyone have any questions right off the bat for Sally? Yes, Ruby.
As an artist yourself, do you paint in abstraction?
No, no I don't, but I have actually thought since researching her work that maybe space is more impactful to my own work than I have previously thought.
Anybody else?
I also forgot to mention, I found inspirations that she specifically noted, which is Raoul Duffy. He was a Fauvist painter, and he really inspired her early work, which I can pass this around. So see, these are the artists that she claimed were her inspiration. And then Paul Klee, Giorgio Morandi, and then in later times, people have compared her to Helen Frankenthaler, I think because of the color and the space. And she also claimed that she asked critics to describe it for her. She didn't claim to have an intent necessarily, but so yeah, she would say, "Will you explain it to me about her own work?" which I thought was funny.
I think that's one of the interesting things, kind of as a museum educator, thinking about guiding people through these spaces and with abstraction. And you mentioned it several times, this idea of, do you need to identify as a feminist artist to have your artwork be considered feminist? And right now we're sitting in this exhibition that is all women artists working in the past century, but who maybe have varying degrees of explicitly articulated connection to that idea of feminism and things like that. You sort of said in your closing thought that you thought this counted as feminist art. Do you think inherently any women working through these times where they're grappling with sexism and the roles are inherently feminist artists?
I would say perhaps, unless they themselves are somehow completely against feminism. But even so, yes, I would say in a way. I think that part of her being a mother, a full-time mother, and continuing being an artist especially, makes it intentionally feminist.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to come back and think and reflect on some of those things about intention. I talk with our curator sometimes about, the idea of even having a women in abstraction show versus just putting them in the narrative with all artists. And is it better to allow them to speak with all artists, or is it better to highlight maybe underrepresented voices? And so there's a tension there. What do you think about having a show that's solely women working in abstraction?
Yeah, when Virginia asked me, I was like, oh, that's not my thing. But I was like, well, women artists, this is a challenge. That's a big part of what I like to do, is educate myself. So I was excited about it. I read that, like I said, Leslie Dill and Mae Stevens and John Quick to See Smith, I think. So I was excited about the work. And so I'm really impressed and excited about it. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge for me.
Does anyone else have any questions for Sally? I think I just wanted to take a moment, because you referenced it, but it's such powerful wording in her own words. And I think I'm probably out of Jason's frame now, but you can just hear my voice. I'm going to read these words of Miyoko Ito's that we've made the choice to put here on the wall, and that I think in many ways informed Sally's interpretation of her use of space. And we think that she was maybe writing this as like asking for kind of funding or a grant or something like that. And it says, plan of work. For better or worse, I am a painter wife who has raised 2 children. All of my adult life, I have painted in the extra bedroom. For the first time, I have been able to experience the meaning of full expression in the conducive environment of McDowell Colony. There is much evidence of increased intensity in the works executed during my 2 seasons at the colony. The fellowship would provide me with the facility of a working studio much needed in the home base, Chicago. I would like to escape the heretofore stifling condition of low ceiling, dim daylight, and inadequate floor space. So she's saying, I went to this kind of artist colony, artist retreat where I had space, where I could spread out, where I could do my thing. And now I'm asking to have that in my home space of Chicago, because I've mostly been in this very confined space. And just because I know this about you as a person, Sally, I know you've had the opportunity to do some artistic residencies and as a working mother and also working artist. What was that experience like for you of getting to go to some other places and really focus on your artistic practice?
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing not working in the kitchen or just having a whole space. Yeah, I can definitely see how she was very impacted by that experience.
And where have you been able to work?
This summer I was in Santa Fe at a gallery there, and then a couple years ago I was in Buenos Aires, which was really fun, and then I did one in Pennsylvania and one in Tennessee. Definitely recommend it.
So thinking about those things, and maybe not grappling with motherhood and the role of womanhood, but I think probably all of you all who are students are, I would assume, maybe in small places, cramped places, where there might not be a ton of artistic inspiration in your immediate environment. I see some smiles and some nods. So thinking about how do we kind of create those spaces for art to be produced, and what societal conditions restrain that, I think is an important part of thinking about this story. Any other questions for Sally? All right, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.